Picture Jimi Hendrix on the Monterey stage in 1967, flames leaping from his guitar, setting the world ablaze. Purple Haze and Voodoo Child drove millions wild, hailing him as a genius. But just 3 years later, in a blood-red room at the Samarkand Hotel, Jimi lay motionless, black vomit soaking his pillow. At 27, he was gone forever. An accident, suicide, or a sinister plot. A handkerchief embroidered with an L. A sketch of a cracked mask, and a notebook with its final page torn out lay beside him, like pieces of a deadly puzzle. His poem, The Story of Life, whispered. The story of life is quicker than the wink of an eye. Red wine poured from his lungs, but tests told a different tale. Who was behind Jimi's death? His manager, the mafia, or the weight of fame itself? Step into the haunting journey of a legend, where glamour hid a horrifying tragedy. Are you ready to uncover the truth behind Jimi Hendrix's death? Chapter 1. A childhood that shaped a future tragedy. Before the world called him a guitar genius, Jimi Hendrix was just a boy clutching a broom, pretending it was a Fender Stratocaster. In his mind, blues notes rang out, drowning the sound of shattering glasses, his parents' fights, and a dark memory he never fully shared. Seattle in the 1940s was a harsh place. Jimi, born on November 27, 1942, grew up in a shabby house where his father, Al, and mother, Lucille, drowned in alcohol. When Jimi was 9, they divorced. Lucille vanished from his life like a song cut short by 1958, when she died of liver disease. Al, a stern father, barred Jimi and his brother Leon from her funeral. He thrust a bottle of whiskey into their hands. Men have to be tough. It was Jimi's first funeral, silent and bitter with liquor. Jimi's life was like a nightmare. His 4 siblings were sent to foster care. At times, young Jimi was shipped off to a family friend in California, far from anything familiar. But music was his only light. At school, he carried that broom, sliding his hands along the handle as if playing a rock and roll riff. A social worker saw him, moved, and tried to get the school to buy him a guitar, but the dream fizzled. At 15, Jimi found a 1-string ukulele in a trash heap. He mimicked Elvis Presley, plucking trembling notes. Finally, Al bought him an old guitar. A handkerchief Lucille had embroidered with Jimi's name was carefully tucked into the guitar case, a sacred keepsake. No one knows if he ever opened it, but on his final night in London, it was found crumpled, strewn across the hotel floor. A whisper lingered from the past. Some said young Jimi flinched at the sight of a man in uniform, a fleeting detail in a memoir, its truth unclear. All that's certain is Jimi kept the world at arm's length, letting music speak for him. He played guitar day and night, slept in abandoned cars when money ran dry. Yet his eyes still burned with hope. In 1961, to avoid jail for stealing a car, Jimi joined the army. He brought his red guitar Betty Jean like a talisman. But just 13 months later, he was discharged for an ankle injury and poor discipline. That guitar was his guiding light, but it also led him to a point of no return: dazzling stages, suffocating fame, and traps he never saw coming. Hope helped Jimi rise above hardship, but it also lit the fuse for tragedy. As a black man in a prejudiced world, Jimi faced judgment and scorn. The music industry, with figures like his manager Michael Jeffrey, waited to mold him into a wild star image he didn't want. The weight of fame and painful memories, like that crumpled handkerchief, would guide him to that fateful night at the Samarkand. Was Jimi's passion for music the spark of his tragedy? Chapter 2, a past he couldn't escape, a tragedy that grew. When all of London stood to applaud Purple Haze, Jimi Hendrix bowed not out of gratitude, but because he was thinking of a place where no one knew him: Seattle. His hometown, a place he never dared return to. In 1967, Jimi was a blazing fire on European stages. His guitar erupted, leaving Paul McCartney and Eric Clapton stunned, jaws dropped, as he played Killing Floor at London Polytechnic. But Jimi hit a shadowed corner of his soul. The Jimi Hendrix Experience, the band that launched him to the top, had an unspoken rule: no performances in Seattle from 1967 to 1969. Some said whenever Seattle was mentioned. Jimi fell silent, as if the name conjured the musty smell of an old room, the sound of late-night shouts, and the fading shadow of his mother, Lucille, slipping through a window. Jimi feared judgment. He dreaded the eyes of his hometown seeing him as the poor kid who slept in abandoned cars, clutching a guitar to forget hunger. He feared racial prejudice. As a black artist compared to the Beatles' white stars universally praised, as a black man in a white-dominated music industry, Jimi was torn. He was criticized for not being political enough for the civil rights movement, forced to represent black communities while denied his true self. "I don't want them to see me as that kid from before," he whispered to his friend Billy Cox. But fame wouldn't let him hide forever. In 1970, he had to return to Seattle, performing at Six Stadium. That night was a nightmare. His fingers missed notes, his lyrics stumbled. Under the stage lights, Jimi's gaze seemed to cut through the crowd, back to a rainy night in an abandoned car where he'd lain, guitar in arms, swallowing tears. The audience murmured, "He's not the Jimi from Monterey." That night, Jimi left the stage earlier than planned. A handkerchief was left behind the curtain embroidered with an L. Lucille, no one dared ask. That shame cut like a blade. Jimi felt he belonged nowhere, not Seattle, not London, not the music world with its towering expectations. He sank into alcohol and drugs to dull the pain, but it only deepened his isolation. The handkerchief, the memory of Seattle, and the pressure of fame were pieces leading to that fateful night at the Samarkand Hotel. Did that fear, the fear of not being accepted, quietly pave the way for an ending no one foresaw? Chapter 3: Temptations Behind the Glamour That Tarnished Love. When Jimi Hendrix stepped off a plane at Heathrow in 1966, no one noticed the black man with an old guitar, but in his mind, wild sounds were already stirring, foreshadowing a flight with no return. London embraced Jimi like a whirlwind. Just 2 months later, his apartment at 34 Montague Square, shared with Kathy Etchingham, hummed with guitar riffs. The notes of Are You Experienced poured out, pushing the album to number 2 in the UK, just behind the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper. At the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, Jimi set his guitar ablaze, as if burning himself. Those flames weren't just a performance. Was it a vow? Or a warning no one knew? Etchingham said Jimi was a terrible flirt but magnetic. One London night, women swarmed him, his shy smile faltering, until Etchingham stepped in to rescue him. Jimi wrote The Wind Cries Mary like a poem for her, but alcohol and LSD blurred those tender moments. He grew jealous, argued, and drifted from Etchingham, as if love was a flickering lamp before a storm. By 1968, Jimi earned $100,000 per show, the world's highest-paid performer. But the glamour was a facade. In his mind, the pressures of fame and racial prejudice were like ropes tightening around him. By 1970, Jimi was in chaos in his final month. He gave rings to 3 women: Monica Danneman, Kirsten Nefer, and Carmen Borrero. No one knew which was real. All that's clear is his eyes held something ready to shatter. A week before his death, Jimi gifted his ex, Linda Keith, an expensive guitar. But when she opened the case, there was no note, just a broken string, like an unspoken farewell. Jimi wanted to explore jazz and acoustic blues, but his manager, Michael Jeffrey, forced him to play Purple Haze to fill wallets. As a black man, Jimi was caught between white audiences and black communities when he played The Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock in 1969, pouring his soul into every note. He was called unpatriotic. "I just play what I feel," he told a friend, his voice bitter. "They want me to be their symbol." Jimi was judged, forced into the wild star mold. He turned to LSD and red wine to escape the pain of being misunderstood. Each pill brought him closer to that fateful night. The rings, the broken string, and his shattered gaze were signs of a lost soul. Jimi's happiness, love. Fame was a flash before the abyss. They say love can save a wayward soul. But that night, as Jimi sat alone with an untuned guitar, London's lights reflecting in an empty glass, who was left to hear him play Chapter 4, The Toronto Drug Bust Temptation or A Trap, Toronto, May 3rd, 1969. Jimi Hendrix landed at the airport, guitar case in hand. A smile like the world was at his feet. 5 minutes later, handcuffs snapped shut. Inside his bag, heroin and marijuana. The first question, how did it get there? Customs hauled Jimi into a stark room, fluorescent lights glaring on his ashen face. 2 charges, each carrying a possible 7-year sentence. Jimi slumped in a chair, hands cradling his head, whispering to his lawyer, "I don't know where that stuff came from." But those close to him whispered something else. Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, his bandmates, later said they'd been tipped off about the search, a detail no one could explain. The 7 months awaiting trial were a nightmare. The press branded Jimi a drug-addled star. The public judged him a criminal. Each night, he drowned in red wine, trying to erase visions of prison. "I don't know if I'll survive this," he told Billy Cox, his voice trembling. During those days, Jimi carried a scribbled drawing, a cracked mask, its eyes inked black, staring back at him. No one asked, and he didn't explain. After the trial, that drawing vanished, as if it took part of his soul. The December 1969 trial was a battle. Jimi cut his hair, wore a suit, and faced the judge with a forced smile. He said a fan gave him the drugs, and he thought they were legal. Trixie Sullivan, an assistant to manager Michael Jeffrey, whispered to friends that a male fan Jimi rejected had planted the drugs for revenge. The jury took 8 hours to declare him not guilty. Jimi left the courtroom, flashing a peace sign, calling it the best Christmas gift, but his eyes didn't smile. Right after, he cut contact with Jeffrey for 2 weeks. When they met again, Jimi didn't shake hands, didn't look at him, saying only, "Don't ever touch my guitar again." The Toronto bust was a sharp wound. Jimi felt violated, a pawn in someone else's game, as a black man. He knew he was an easy target, scrutinized relentlessly by media and public. That pain drove him deeper into LSD, amphetamines and barbiturates, as if only drugs understood him. Each pill was a step closer to the blood-red room at the Samarkand, where the handkerchief with Enel would lie crumpled beside him. Toronto was the first crack. But months later, Jimi would collapse in London in a room with an unlocked door and an unfinished recording. Was it all coincidence? Or a sad song composed in advance? Chapter 5, Signs Leading to an Obsession with Death in 1970. Jimi Hendrix woke each morning to a glass of wine and vacant eyes. In the mirror, he no longer saw himself just a shadow of the man who set Monterey ablaze. He was gaunt, eyes sunken, plagued by anxiety and stomach ulcers. Endless tour schedules, paternity lawsuits, and the weight of fame were like wires around his throat. But something darker loomed, a grim premonition. In Morocco in 1969, a fortune teller drew the death card, whispering of a symbolic end. Jimi, then 26, believed he wouldn't live past 30. "Time's counting down," he told a friend, his voice lost in the wind. Jimi acted as if death was stalking him. He called Kathy Etchingham, begging to meet, inviting her to the Samarkand Hotel on his final day. But she didn't come. A voicemail to his former manager, Chaz Chandler, echoed in the dark, "I need help. Man." No one answered. One Christmas night, Carmen Barrero left a hotel with blood on her shirt. Jimi stood silent, still holding a vodka bottle. No one knew what happened inside, only that he wept, whispering, "I can't control this monster anymore." Wine and LSD were his only escape, but each pill was a note in a symphony of self-destruction. Jimi was fascinated by dried flowers in the Samarkand room where he'd die. He told Monica Danneman, "You can learn from things that are dead." Was he sensing his fate as a black man? He was judged for not being political enough for civil rights, forced to play Purple Haze instead of the jazz he loved. He wanted freedom, but was boxed into the wild star image. Self-blame burned like fire. The handkerchief with Enel, his mother's keepsake, stayed in his guitar case. But Jimi didn't touch it. He let go, taking the fatal sleeping pills. Did Jimi Hendrix feel death closing in, or was he preparing the room for it? Chapter 6: Despair, the Fateful Night at Samarkand. The night of September 17th, 1970. The blood-red room at the Samarkand was silent. Amid velvet curtains, wilted dried flowers hung like mourners at an unnamed funeral. Jimi Hendrix, exhausted, possibly with the flu, sat with Monica Dannemann, a glass of red wine glinting under the lamp. They partied, laughed, but Jimmy's eyes were distant, as if peering through an invisible wall. He took amphetamines, smoked marijuana, and returned at 3 a.m, unable to sleep. Jimmy swallowed 9 Vesperax pills of barbiturate 18 times the recommended dose. Dannemann said they talked until 7 a.m, but hotel phone records showed no calls after 4:12. Her story began to unravel. At 11 a.m. on the 18th, Dannemann found Jimmy motionless, black vomit soaking the pillow. Paramedic Reggie Jones entered, shuddering. "I've never seen anything this bad." Jimmy was rushed to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, but it was too late. He died at 12:45, only 27. Dr. John Bannister reported red wine pouring from his lungs and stomach, yet toxicology tests showed almost no alcohol. In 2009, James Tappy Wright claimed Michael Jeffrey stuffed pills and wine down Jimmy's throat to kill him, fearing Jimmy would leave his contract. Bob Levine, Jimmy's U.S. manager, dismissed it. Wright made it up to sell books. But Dannemann raised more doubts. She said Jimmy was alive when the ambulance came, then claimed she went to buy cigarettes that morning. No one saw her when the ambulance arrived. Near Jimmy's body, a notebook listed phone numbers, but one page, the last, was torn out. His poem, The Story of Life, lay nearby, with the line, "The story of life is quicker than the wink of an eye." Eric Burden thought it was a suicide note, then backtracked. A 2024 X post suggested Jeffrey had mafia ties, once kidnapping Jimmy in 1969 as a warning. Jimmy was strangled by fame and prejudice, labeled a drug star by the press, forced to perform to exhaustion, judged for not being political enough. His death was the peak of despair, where the handkerchief with an L lay crumpled beside him. Epilogue, an immortal legacy, a flame that never fades. Jimi Hendrix left this world on September 18, 1970, but his fire never died. At 27, he left a musical legacy that reshaped the world. Are You Experienced, Electric Ladyland, and the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock are eternal flames. In Renton, Washington, the If 6 Was 9 monument rises like a stone blaze, not to illuminate, but to burn through the prejudices that bound him. Rolling Stone named him the #1 guitarist in 2003. He entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1992, influencing hard rock, funk, and hip-hop. On March 18, 2025, Washington State awarded him the Medal of Merit, with Jimmy's family and the Museum of Pop Culture accepting in Olympia. The 2025 Experience Hendrix Tour brings Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Buddy Guy, who met Jimmy in 1968, back to the stage at 88 to honor him. But what is Jimmy's legacy? A genius trapped by fame and prejudice, or a free spirit misunderstood? The handkerchief with an L, the cracked mask sketch, the torn notebook page pieces of an unsolved tragedy, his poem The Story of Life, the mysterious red wine, and the message "I need help" were cries no one heard. Or was he redefined by those who never understood him? Michael Jeffrey, Monica Dannemann, or the music industry who pushed Jimmy into the dark? Jimmy was a victim of his time, a black man in a white-dominated world, an artist craving freedom in a trap-filled industry. He was judged, violated, forced into the wild star mold. "I just want to play my music my way," he once said, his voice bitter. From a broom in Seattle to the Monterey stage, Jimmy turned pain into art. His story is a warning: fame can be a blade and prejudice can kill a dream. But Jimmy is also a symbol of resilience, a fire that never fades. Share Jimi Hendrix's story so new generations understand the value of creativity and the cost of fame. Or is it just the final note of a song he never finished playing?